Thank you so much, and I want to particularly thank the League for your early and active support of Measure HH, and in particular Ruby McDonald for all of her help in getting this on the ballot and getting your endorsement and making sure that we have volunteers. It's been really, really a delight. We have over 25 organizations working on this measure, and it's been a real exercise in community building. I want to just start with some general comments, and then I'm happy to take any questions that people have. I think what I want to talk about is what the genesis is of HH. It started as a small idea that came from the city of Albany, actually, to try to increase the utility user tax on gas and electricity for those who are not low income, relieve those who are low income of the entire tax, not just the increase, but the entire tax, and to use the proceeds for climate improvements that often can't be afforded by low-income homeowners, retirees, and certainly not by tenants. And this small idea has grown now to include a whole host of improvements that will let us ensure that the money is well spent, that we have a rigorous process in the city of Berkeley, and that we are looking at things that will really make a difference in people's lives. So, you know, I woke up on the morning of Wednesday, September 9th, and I thought my alarm had gone off too early. The sky was the color of blood oranges and there was ash falling from the sky. But it wasn't my alarm that was off, it was the climate, it was the planet. The earth was demanding that we pay attention. And that day redoubled my resolve to pass Measure HH, Berkeley's Climate Equity Action Fund. We have now broken so many climate records in 2020 that it's hard to keep track. Heat waves in California hitting 130 degrees, over 4 million acres burned, 44 spare the air days in the Bay Area, and more. The climate crisis is definitely here, and it's not going to get any better. It's going to get worse if we don't act quickly. The impact of climate change affects all of us, but it's compounded for those who do not have the luxury of working from home, like I do, or even indoors, and for those who don't have an indoors at all. I think of Berkeley's essential workers collecting garbage, delivering food, and doing construction in the heat and the smoke, and now the dark. I worry about how the elderly, disabled, and immunocompromised will deal with the dual impacts of it being too hot to stay inside and too smoky to open the windows. These impacts are an assault on top of the other historic inequities that inherent in already existing health, education, and housing disparities. Disparities that have been laid particularly bare because of COVID-19. As it takes a disproportionate toll on our lower income communities. It's clear that waiting for Washington to lead will not make us safe, and state leadership is not enough or bold enough to address the significant gaps in our local response. All of our cities in the East Bay have tried a number of approaches to the climate. We have looked at trying to educate people about what they can do personally about climate. We've provided incentive funding. We've provided some requirements like the recently passed ban on natural gas in new buildings. But we have a goal of reducing our GHGs by 80% by 2050, and we're at about 16% right now from 2000. We need urgent action and the funds to pursue these solutions. Today, as I said, most of our local approaches are based on incentives that are advantageous to better off homeowners like myself, but they haven't addressed renters and are cost prohibitive for low-income property owners. While some of us, like me, can afford an electric vehicle and the needed charging infrastructure, many working people have to drive older cars and take increasingly less regular public transit. The most energy inefficient residences in Berkeley and Albany are older homes and apartments without sufficient insulation or heating. These are the same homes that produce the most greenhouse gases. Improvements here can reduce residents' energy costs, improve comfort, and literally insulate vulnerable children and elders from the direct impacts in their homes and protect the rest of us by reducing greenhouse gases. Measure HH envisions a combination of specific programs from subsidized transportation, such as my dream of a downtown shuttle, something I've been trying to accomplish for years, and discounted memberships in scooter and bike share and green car rentals. The programs that reduce the climate impacts of our residences through allowing purchases of heat pumps and energy efficiency programs that will also allow us to hire community members into good green collar jobs. I don't want to say that this is Berkeley's own Green New Deal. It's too small for that, but it is a down payment on that. These programs will help the climate and protect our health and safety. Over the last year, I worked with my colleagues in the City Council to talk about how we can best make these improvements in existing buildings. We have done a lot on new buildings, but it's the existing housing structure and the existing transportation arrangements that are creating most of our GHGs. Changing the structure of the utility user tax is the clearest and most directly relevant route to fixing our climate while making small advances on income inequality. Measure HH specifically, and then I'll talk about DD and Albany in a minute, exempts the lowest income residents from the existing 7.5% utility tax, saving them hundreds of dollars a year, and increases the tax for others in a use more, pay more model of $2.50 for every $100 in energy costs. Altogether, it will generate approximately $2.4 million that we can, with community input leverage, for a big impact. The HH establishes a climate equity fund and creates a climate action and energy commission. This revised commission is built on the model from the sugar sweetened beverage task force that many of you know about, that will have additional specific commissioner qualifications and oversight responsibilities to make recommendations to the City Council on how to allocate the funds deposited in the Climate Equity and Action Fund. This fund is also a place to put other money that can match these local funds. The Council to date has kept faith with the spirit and intent of the sugar sweetened beverage tax, and will do so here. There's no indication in any way that we have misspent the funds in the sugar sweetened beverage tax, and we won't do that either here. Many have said that now's not the time. Our society is facing a pandemic, economic collapse, police brutality, displacement, and homelessness. They say we can't afford another measure to increase even minimally the cost of living, but I think we can't afford not to. We can begin to pay now, or we can pay much more in lives and livelihoods, homes, and dollars later. This modest increase in energy taxes is a small down payment on the much deeper and more dramatic necessary changes that we're going to have to make in the next few years. Let's get started now. We can begin to slow down the climate crisis, and we can certainly begin to protect those most impacted. I'd be happy to take questions. Again, I want to thank the League, the Ecology Center, the Sierra Club, SEIU 1021, Green the Church, 350 Bay Area, the East Bay Working Families, Transition Berkeley, Physicians for Climate Now, and many others in supporting Measure HH. Thank you very much. Questions?
Were you going to cover Albany's?
Yes, let me tell you about Albany's. It's slightly different than Berkeley's. One includes a tax on water, which is something that we did not do in Berkeley, and that does not exist right now in Albany, but does exist in El Cerrito and Pinole. So it would have a 7.5% tax on water. The intention for that money is to go towards emergency preparedness. We have a separate ballot measure in Berkeley for that, Measure FF. And then it also increases the tax on gas and electricity, just like Berkeley's. And that 1/3 of the funding, which is expected to be about $200,000 a year compared to Berkeley's $2.4 million, is intended to be spent on climate protection. They also provide an exemption for care customers, as do we. So people that can enroll in discount PG&E programs, they either have already or they will be able to enroll, will be able to be exempted from the tax altogether. So it's very similar to Berkeley's, but there are a few differences. One of which is that it has a bigger impact because it has the water tax, which is going to emergency preparedness. And we're handling that through a proposed property tax.
Okay.
Can I ask a question, Carol?
No, I wanted to tell anybody who can go to the chat room if they have a question.
Okay, okay.
I saw Stephen's hand up, I think. Did anyone have a question for me? Thoughts? Yeah, Miss Benner. You have to unmute yourself, Miss Benner, sorry. I can't do it for you. You got to unmute yourself. There we go. Good.
I'd like to know what your timeline is in terms of what the expenditures will be in a given time and what you expect they'll accomplish.
Okay, great. I'm glad you asked that. We think that this tax, including the discount for low-income people, on balance will raise about $2.4 million a year. There are hundreds of things we could be doing with this money. We have set up a system of evaluation for the proposed climate mission, and to look at various alternatives for spending this money. Some of the ideas are clean transportation, rebates for new and used electric and hybrid vehicles, installing electric car stations, subsidizing bike share programs, and free or discounted transit passes, or increasing transit service, for example, with the downtown shuttle, as I mentioned. Secondly is looking at buildings, rebates for energy efficient appliances and lighting, insulation and windows, or electric heat pumps, which provide much higher quality heat and now provide air conditioning and air filtering, really important given the climate, for less cost than a gas heater. Discounted potentially solar panels and batteries. Green jobs, I think one of the important aspects, even though I don't like to call this a Green New Deal because it's not as big as what you're going to hear about later, is that we want to work with our community colleges and others to help people get into the trades. When I went to replace my ancient heater, which blew up in my house and could have killed us, with a heat pump, I basically had a really hard time finding a contractor to do it. Because that piece of who do I call as a homeowner to get these things done is missing. So we need to do training, job training, et cetera. And then finally, just direct protecting against the impact of climate changes. For example, air filters for low-income seniors, and N95 masks for day laborers, or some other suggestions. So these are all ideas. It is a general fund tax. It has this as its purpose, but the commission will be asked to bring recommendations to the council. We would decide among these things about what has the biggest impact on climate and what most helps lower income people. Yes, Ms. Benner.
It all sounds wonderful. Good. One thing you hadn't mentioned, which has been on the list for quite a while, is improving our streets, including safe bike lanes, which very much Berkeley needs.
Yes, and that is part of the plan. I want to say there are other avenues for streets. So one reason I don't emphasize it as much is our gas taxes can go to complete streets. Our infrastructure bond, T1 in Berkeley. There's other sources. There's really no source of money for these direct climate impacts. It's astounding. Nobody really pays for that. You know, it's what in economics we call an externality. It's just a thing that happens to all of us that no one's responsible for. But certainly we do include in there the idea of improving the complete street network. You know, I live right off Shattuck, and it always concerned me that when you come up Hearst, you get to Hearst and Millvia, and the bike lane stops. And then you have to get across Shattuck without a bike lane, and then you pick up the bike lane again. Or another corner of my district, Dwight in California, kids are in a bike lane on California, they get to Dwight and they fly across this very busy street without any infrastructure. It's really unsafe. So we do need to create a safe bike infrastructure for those of us that don't wear spandex all the time and are a little nervous about riding our bikes in Berkeley. I think that's an important thing, but I just want to say there are other sources of funding for some of those programs as well.
Thank you.
Can other people put ideas in, or just the commission? Can the Ecology Center put some inputs into what might be done?
Oh, yes, we certainly are looking to have the Ecology Center's Climate Action Group is actively involved in the campaign, and they will be consulting with people. And I hope that all of my colleagues and myself will reappoint people to the Energy Commission. Much respect to the people we have now, but they tend to be more technocratic and not as community oriented. And we need more people that represent things like the Ecology Center, Climate Health Now. We need people that have a sense of what low-income people need. So yeah, I intended to replace my commissioner with someone from the community who represents a broader spectrum. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from the Ecology Center on their ideas as well. But they're one of the authors of the measure. I also see a question in the chat about how HH is paid for. Yes, businesses will also be paying the increased utility user tax. So it applies to everyone. The average cost, including businesses, is $4.44 a month is estimated. But for a homeowner whose utility bill is about $100, it'll be $2.50. So it'll be more for business and less for homeowners and residents. Other questions?
So is the size of the increase based on the list of projects that would be financed, or is there some other way of deciding on the size of the increase in the user utility tax?
Yeah, I think I appreciate that. I mean, $2.4 million is not going to pay for a lot, but doing more than that is going to be too big an impact for people. So we tried to strike a balance of something that would bring in money and allow seed money for a lot of these projects, but wouldn't hit us so hard individually. Because, you know, if you get up to a higher tax right now, we're at 10, this would be 10%. More than that, it starts to impact people. And, you know, we are in the middle of a pandemic. So we want something that's reasonably sized that gets us started. Carol? Yeah.
There's also the tax on the ballot, FF, and that requires a 2/3 majority. And I'm assuming that's a larger amount. Could you compare the two taxes?
Yes, that tax will be about $200 and something a year. And I'm not working on that campaign, so I'm not the best person to ask, but it's about $200 a year, and this is about 25. Other questions? Yeah, Ms. Benner.
One of the concerns I've heard is that this is not a 2/3, and it is the money could disappear into the general fund. And how are you going to keep that from happening? And if you start with this token money, then maybe with our next election, you can go for the 2/3 and a larger fund if you do well with this one. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a really good question, but since I've been on the council, I've spent a lot of time ensuring that our money for Measure P, which is the increase in the transfer tax for homeless services, goes as it was supposed to. Making sure that the sugar sweetened beverage tax is spent the way it's supposed to be. So, you know, part of it is not a really satisfactory answer, but it's a reliance on representative democracy. You elect us, and if we screw this up, you can throw us out. There's not any attempt on anyone's part in the council to take this money for anything else. And again, you know, the way we hold electeds responsible is by electing them. We right now spend $400 million in general fund that come from your property tax, sales tax, et cetera. And people don't say, well, how do we know they're spending the money well? If they do, and they should, then they should be asking us this hard question. So this is just another hard question you're going to have to ask us. And I'm really committed to this. My sugar sweetened beverage commissioner, who's chair of that commission, will tell you I have been, you know, a pretty strong advocate for making sure I understand where those dollars are going. It's not something I'm going to give up easily. It could, you know, we could come back later and ask for 2/3, but then you would have that, you could make the decision on whether you wanted to pass that or not. So. Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, if we're done with that, maybe we can, we can move on. Thank you, Kate. That was terrific.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome. And I just wanted you to know that all council people have endorsed the measure as well. So, as well as David Hochschild, who's chair of the California Energy Commission, and a whole host of other organizations and individuals that are concerned about climate. So thank you for your time. It was nice to meet all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Liz, can you come back?
Here. Can you see me and can you hear me?
We can. So Liz Finnegan is a clean tech and clean energy professional currently serving as a principal at PG&E, where she manages PG&E's solar programs, focusing on disadvantaged and low-income communities. She's held several interesting roles since joining PG&E in 2017, including managing their electric vehicle charging programs, managing electric and gas grid interconnections, and PG&E's investments in clean hydrogen and renewable natural gas, among others. She graduated with her undergraduate degree in international affairs from the George Washington University in Washington and her MBA in clean energy finance and modeling from Duke University. She was born and raised in Washington, D.C., but now lives in the East Bay in Oakland in Jack London Square and loves it. So Liz is going to talk to us about the Biden program, among other things.
Yes. Well, it's my pleasure to meet you all. Carol, thank you so much for that kind introduction. And it was really exciting when Carol told me about all of you. And I was thinking how I should join the League of Women Voters because it sounds like you guys talk about really exciting things and are really engaged. So I know it's probably not this group who has never heard of the current candidates or their platforms, but for those of you who have video on, can you raise a hand if you really think you understand Joe Biden's climate change and energy platform well? No one? Okay, well then this will be a useful presentation. So I work at PG&E right now. Not maybe the most popular company, but it's because I love clean energy and I love working at climate change, and that is my mission in life. And so when I graduated from business school, I decided I wanted to work here in California, where we are doing the most to advance clean technology and climate solutions. And so that's where I spent my career. And recently I've been volunteering for a group called Clean Energy for Biden, reviewing Biden's climate platform. So that's what I'm going to do with you guys today. I'm going to take you through Biden and Trump's climate platforms so that you guys are as informed as humanly possible when you vote, or when you're talking about other people who are curious why they should vote. So with that being said, I'm going to try and share my screen. So bear with me if this takes a second, but I'm going to try doing that now. Can everybody see this presentation that I'm sharing right now?
Yes.
All right. Now there's a lot written on this presentation. You guys don't have to read that. I'm going to talk over all of it so you can just listen to my voice, and I will send out this presentation to you. And if you'd like to read anything that I talked about, you're absolutely welcome to open and read this at any time. So just, you don't need to worry too much if you miss any particular thing. So before we get started, or as we get started, I wanted to start with kind of what's the big overarching differences between the campaigns and their platforms. So Joe Biden is the Democratic presidential nominee, and you'll see his platform here on the left. And he has three major issues where he has like the 20 pages of policy on his website. And that is, he has a plan for infrastructure investment, which is based in a clean energy economy. The second is the plan for environmental justice. I think we heard a little bit about that from the previous speaker, and how we plan to, have this equitable transition to clean economy. And then finally is his kind of straightforward climate plan, and a lot more about clean energy specifically. Donald Trump has, he doesn't actually have a section with plans and policy, so I did my best to cobble together some of those things based on what he does have on his website, which are achievements. And he really is proud of expanding American energy, so specifically oil and gas, so oil and gas drilling and financing and things like that, and reducing environmental and clean energy regulations. He claims they're too costly. He does have one plan, which I think is notable, which is an infrastructure plan. And I'll go through them so that you guys are fully informed about everything. Does anyone have any questions? Yes? Yes? No? All right, we're gonna go on. So, we're gonna start with Joe Biden's plans. And I think this does a really good job of summarizing what his view of clean energy is and his general, the foundation for his platforms, which is that he said, when I think about climate change, the word I think of is jobs. And ultimately, you'll see throughout that on the Democratic presidential platform, there are several references to clean energy being the foundation for investment and infrastructure moving forward, as well as new jobs, and then making sure that in the transition to that new economy, we're taking care of people along the way. So this, again, you don't have to read this. I'm going to take care of you. But essentially, this is Joe Biden's climate plan. It was the first one that he came out with, and he came out with it really early on. And it was essentially saying, you know, I want to get to a net zero economy by 2050. But over the course of his campaign, as he began to interact with other parts of the Democratic Party, he changed some of those things to say that his official platform is 100% clean energy economy and net zero emissions no later than 2035. So that is a new change, even though it says this on his website. So the net zero emissions, we're going to move to a clean power economy by 2035. So this involves about $1.7 trillion investment over the next 10 years, especially trying to work with the private sector to generate new investment, to have them also invest in the clean energy economy. And they're hoping that will add up to about $5 trillion, which is a heck of a lot of money. He says that he'll pay for it by reversing the tax cuts, if you'll remember, that were made under the current president in, I believe it was 2017, I think. He also says that he will re-enter the Paris Agreement on the first day of his presidency, and that he says that's not enough. We have to really make sure, as we represent only 15% of all of the emissions throughout the world, we can't just do our part. We also have to make sure others are also doing their part. And so he's going to lead a coalition, or he is going to try to lead a coalition to get other countries to be more aggressive in their climate targets than they are in the Paris Climate Agreement. He also has a clear foundation that he's going to, quote, hold polluters accountable. That means greater enforcement of clean air and water rules. That means safe drinking water. I think a lot of us are familiar with what happened in Flint, Michigan. That's a good example of some of the things he's targeting with this particular bullet. And then last but not least, I think one thing Joe Biden has really emphasized is that we need to make sure we are not leaving certain communities behind in our transition to the clean economy. And so he does identify coal communities and power communities, meaning, you know, maybe natural gas power plants that we'd like to take offline, making sure that we don't just leave them out in the cold and that we're providing them with the support that they need to transition in the new economy. So that's kind of this general plan. And again, you don't need to read all this, but I'm just going to pick out a few of my favorite facts that they claim. So Joe Biden, as part of this plan, will require aggressive methane pollution limits for new and existing oil and gas operations, even though it does not ban fracking. He's going to develop new fuel economy standards for cars. He'll convene a World Climate Summit to deal directly with international leaders. He'll protect biodiversity by slowing extinction rates, by conserving 30% of America's lands and waters by 2030. That's a big one. He permanently protects the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, banning new oil and gas permitting on public lands and waters. He'll establish a new climate-focused Advanced Research Projects Agency. I don't know if you guys are familiar with DARPA, which invented the internet and like robotic arms and stuff. He's going to establish one of those for the climate. So it's going to target really interesting and game-changing technology that could really help us reach our climate goals faster. And some of those things are like trying to take carbon out of the process to make steel, right? Or working on modular nuclear reactors, which will be smaller and safer. And then last but not least, we're going to reduce the carbon footprint of the US building stock 50% by 2035. So that is the basis of this plan. That's a lot. Does anyone have any questions? Is this overwhelming? All right, hearing none.
I have a question.
Of course.
I don't know whether you can see my picture or not there.
I can see now.
So when you say that the goal is clean energy by 2035, is that electricity or is that to be carbon neutral, which means all emissions, including agriculture, construction, conservation? Are we
That's a
talking
really
electricity or are we talking about carbon?
Absolutely. So by 2035, Joe Biden's plan is to be clean energy for our power sector. That means that all the utilities across the country need to generate from renewable sources by 2035. But as you say, that doesn't include agriculture, it doesn't include buildings, it doesn't include all kinds of other industrial processes. It doesn't include cows, because cow poop generates methane. And so the second piece is that by 2050, the plan is to be carbon neutral. And that, I think one interesting thing that I personally like about this plan is that he says there has to be an enforcement mechanism, both for the power sector to meet that 2035 deadline, but also for the economy to meet that net zero emission 2050 deadline. And he's going to kind of put in milestones along the way. So that's the plan.
Thanks.
Yes.
I have a question. My understanding is that Trump was going to allow some sort of oil and gas exploration in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge.
Yes.
If that goes through and Biden wins the election, can he reverse it, or
Yes.
how would it work?
The answer is yes. So the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge has already been, Trump has already allowed drilling and exploration in the refuge. That is something that he is proud of, and that I have later on in the presentation that he says is an achievement of his administration. However, that is not something that was done by law. That is something that was done because the Arctic Refuge is federal land. That means it comes under the management of the Department of the Interior. And the Department of the Interior is an executive cabinet position. So that is within the discretion of the president. So just as Donald Trump opened that to drilling, just so a future president could close it if they decided to do so. And if Joe Biden wins, he has indicated he will stop it. Does that answer your question?
Can I ask, what is the general, I know that it's huge and there are many huge companies, but what is the general reaction of, say, fossil fuel companies or other maybe companies which would be impacted by these proposals? Have they said that they object, or?
Well, it is very interesting because they do have strong feelings about it, but their number one strongest feeling is actually that that the U.S. be consistent, actually. So they have indicated, so Big Oil has indicated that they are actually open to a carbon tax, right? They are open to a price on carbon. They are open to any number of things, so long as it's clear, right? And doesn't necessarily mess with other stuff that they have going on, right? So in this particular case, for instance, a lot of the fights that Big Oil has been involved in, you'll notice have been long and drawn out, such as the Keystone XL pipeline, right? or the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And that's partially because a lot of those things got started a long time ago, back when they thought it was possible to do that. They made all the plans and made all the investment. And then during the Obama administration, there was a halt to those things. And so they were saying, you know, we want to go back in and do this. Now, they're not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. They're doing it because they think that it will make them money. And that is true. However, it is worthwhile mentioning that this is not just an American issue. And so if we do not allow them to drill in the Arctic Refuge, then Exxon can just go drill in a different Arctic refuge, unfortunately, unless we go to the global community and say, we need to not drill in these places at all. It is clear that a lot of these global oil companies are already anticipating that climate change is coming. But a lot of them have different checks on their businesses, including chemicals production. So all the plastic you consume comes from oil, right? And, you know, they think, for instance, that methane production, so natural gas, is actually relatively good. And if you're replacing natural gas, if you're replacing coal with natural gas, it actually is much better. But over the course of time, I think it's clear that they don't necessarily want these intrusions, but that, you know, ultimately, they just want to know for sure what's going to happen and then be able to plan accordingly. And that stability reduces their risk, and reducing risk increases profit for oil companies. So that's, I think, what they want. So, who knows? I don't think they want to ban on fracking, though, that's for sure. Did I answer your question?
I had a question, but you have to unmute.
I can't see.
I have a question.
Sure.
Maybe I missed it, but there doesn't seem to be anything about fracking. And that was a question that came up during the Harris-Pence debate.
You're exactly
Is it included in one of these, or did I miss it?
You haven't missed it. The fact of the matter is that the Biden plan does not ban fracking. So.
That's sort of what they said in the debate, and
yeah. So I think the detail that would be most helpful here is that, number one, the Biden-Harris plan does not ban fracking. It just doesn't. The second thing is that it does ban new permits, new drilling,
right.
All these kinds of things in federally protected lands and waters. So if you're just saying, using fracking as a generic term for oil companies trying to find and produce new oil in the US, it still doesn't ban that, because it's only banning it on federal land, right? So private land, they can still do whatever they want. That's the part of this which is free country, you know? But they do plan to say no more of that on federal land. And there's going to be a lot of new standards that these companies have to meet to make sure that they're avoiding things like unintentional methane leaks. So you'll see under the number 1 on your screen, there's going to be aggressive new regulations around methane leaks and methane pollution. That's because the methane chemical, CH4, it's much bigger than CO2, the chemical, you know, like much bigger, right? And CH4 is a really aggressive greenhouse gas molecule. It actually warms the environment pound for pound 20 to 30 times more than carbon. So it's really not good. But if you ever go around and you see those like those oil fields and things like that, and you see them like burning things, you're like, how could that possibly be good for the environment? When you burn methane, it takes the methane and it basically uses a chemical reaction to create the flame, the energy, as well as extra CO2. And of course, the extra CO2 is not good, but if there are 4 CO2 molecules, that's much better warming than the 20 to 30 times that one methane piece would have contributed to the environment. Does that make sense? So making sure that methane or natural gas fields don't leak, or that there's no methane pollution, is actually a really big deal in helping to make sure we keep global climate change under control, especially if we're using more methane in the future to replace dirtier, worse coal. Does that answer your question?
I have one other question.
Sure.
You know, the Trump administration has undone many of the clean air, clean water regulations that the Obama administration put in. Has any of that been addressed as part of a platform? Is putting those back on the books, so to speak?
Yes, so why don't I do this? So, so this is an overview, and again, you don't have to read this, I'm just gonna tell you. Joe Biden has he has like a whole plan just devoted to environmental justice. And that includes things like clean air and clean water. And one of the interesting things that you point out is that a lot of the levers you can pull within the federal government to protect clean air, clean water, grant access to all types of people for those critical things, all of that stuff is within the executive branch. So that's within the realm of the president. And so there have been tons and tons of rollbacks of clean air and clean water legislation, everything from actual clean air and clean water to, car economy standards, to methane pollution, things like that. And so Joe Biden's plan here on environmental justice and equitable economic opportunity goes into that a little bit, which is that ultimately this can be an all of government type of thing. Ultimately, he says he wants to establish an environmental and climate justice division in the U.S. Department of Justice, overhaul the EPA Civil Rights Compliance Office, which means trying to focus not just on the environment, but also making sure that it's not disproportionately impacting communities of color or low-income communities. They're going to make sure they're establishing new sources of data. It's a lot harder to figure out where you have problems if you don't collect the right information on it in the first place, right? And then once you do so, it's a lot easier to be able to communicate with those folks. Say we collect some additional data on housing in Berkeley, and we're able to say, you know what, because of all the smoke, you have like X number of people who are actually exposed to a healthy level of smoke X amount of days of the year. This is how much money we should allocate to the city of Berkeley for retrofits on houses or on air filters or things like that, right? And so that is a part of federal government work. I mean, you guys, as you saw earlier, you guys could do it, but the amount of money it takes and the amount of effort it takes to create all that infrastructure is much a bigger lift for a community, and it's hard to raise taxes to do those things. It's better if the federal government creates that infrastructure and then it can just plug in all of the different locations. In addition, this particular plan really tries to assess and kind of figure out whether or not risks for the next public health emergency are disproportionately impacting certain communities. So as we've seen, we have fires out here in California, but I'm originally from Washington, D.C. We have hurricanes over there and flooding, right? And in the Midwest, I mean, I know you guys must have seen some of those stories about the tornadoes that are just wreaking havoc. And I didn't think Texas would be a place for flooding, but earlier this year, if you remember, or late last year, they had really devastating floods. And so ultimately, we have to try and figure out a way to reduce climate disaster risk, which is getting greater and greater the more climate change begins to impact our lives, right? And then we also have to make sure not only do we address the risk properly, but we're also responding in a way that's not prioritizing, privileged or higher income communities in a way that's leaving out communities that cannot fend for themselves. Joe Biden specifically pulls out children, the elderly, people with disabilities, and the vulnerable, in addition to low income and communities of color. So, you know, I think, is this kind of addressing your question here? This is another major plan that he has in place, and it does focus almost entirely on clean air and clean water access.
So Liz, doesn't
Yes.
he also have, doesn't he also talk about Indigenous people? in this
Yes,
plan?
absolutely.
Okay.
He really does, and he specifically pulls out BIPOC and Indigenous communities in a couple of specific areas. My problem is that his platforms are like 20 pages long, so I'm trying to figure out what to highlight. But before we answer another question really fast, I want to go back quickly because I know we have a couple of folks on the line here who are also, you know, experts on the Green New Deal. And so, you know, just before we kind of get involved in that, I did want to take a second and explain what the Green New Deal is, because some of you obviously watched the presidential and the vice presidential debate, and a couple times the Green New Deal came up, and people were like, does Biden support the Green New Deal? Doesn't he? It's confusing. What specifically is in it? So I thought I would do a quick overview, and then we have some other folks later who I'm sure will know more. But ultimately, the thing about the Green New Deal is that it's not actually a law. It's not a bill. It's not legislation. It's just a resolution. It's essentially designed to say, here's a problem, and let's make sure we agree that it's a problem, and here's a solution, and here's what we propose we should do about it. And so ultimately it says it agrees with climate scientists that climate change is man-made, and that I think one of the biggest things it does is it says we should stop burning fossil fuels and we should do it tomorrow, right? Now it argues that incremental progress is really too slow for the magnitude of the problem that we have ahead of us. And then it says, honestly, that transition will be painful, and there will be people left behind in an economy that is founded on fossil fuels, which ultimately our current economy is. And it says that Americans should be protected during the transition, including a jobs guarantee, public employment, education and training, and not just for co-workers, but the important part about the Green New Deal is that it says that we should guarantee these things for all Americans so that we can ensure an equitable transition and make sure we are not leaving out individual or less privileged communities during the course of this transition, or that we're not wasting the opportunity to bring in, you know, new communities. Does this make sense? The reason why I wanted to mention this is because that makes it a lot easier for us to compare. So there are some things that Biden does not support, and Biden has never, even as a candidate or, as a Democratic candidate or as the Democratic nominee, has never actually endorsed the Green New Deal. And his platform nowhere guarantees universal health care or universal jobs guarantee, which is in the Green New Deal. And he does not support a ban on fracking or banning the use of fossil fuels. So those are key differences. So when you hear them arguing back and forth and you're like, you support a Green New Deal? It's like, no, I don't. This is what he's saying. He doesn't necessarily support universal health care or universal jobs guarantee, and he doesn't support a ban on fracking or on all fossil fuels. But there are some similarities. Joe Biden does cite this on his website and says that it's a very critical framework. It's principles he generally agrees with, which is that we do need to meet the climate challenges in America, and we need to do a lot in a short amount of time. He also emphasizes the importance of an equitable transition, and that we should make sure we're addressing issues of environmental justice and incorporating the reduction of fossil fuels and the adoption of clean alternatives. And Kamala Harris did support the Green New Deal as a candidate. Does anyone have any questions on the differences between the official Joe Biden platform and the Green New Deal?
Hi. Yeah, I would just like to say that very soon we're going to be presenting
Oh, perfect. I'm sorry.
You know this, right? We'll be presenting information about the Green New Deal. I appreciate that you are talking about the differences because, in my opinion, a lot of them are political nuance, but that's, you know, we can decide after we see the presentation, which will be in a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Does anyone have any more questions about Joe Biden's platform in general? There's so much here. We just cannot possibly go over all of it. I was going to go over a little bit of Trump's, if you guys would like.
I have a question.
Of course.
So, first of all, thank you very much for your very thorough presentation and for having it all laid out for us. That's wonderful. And I read Drawdown and a few other books about the climate. And so I'm kind of going through my mind and checking off things. And one big area well, there's actually two big areas, but I'm just going to name one. That's missing from Drawdown is anything in Biden's program or the Green New Deal program on sequestering carbon through plants and the way the lands are managed. And I didn't see anything. Is there something that do you know if there's anything in there? Anyway, let me just cut to the chase. There's a new film out on sequestering. It's very hopeful. It's a film on sequestering carbon in the ground. It's called Kiss the Ground. And it's on Netflix and just came out about 2 weeks ago. And it takes the agricultural part of Drawdown by Paul Hawkins and puts it into a really inspirational way to start not only just not putting carbon in the air, but also taking it down out of the air and putting it back in the ground. So Kiss the Ground. But did I miss something in the plans? That
sounds like my kind of documentary. I am excited to watch it. No, you did not miss anything. There is nothing specific to carbon capture or sequestration in Joe Biden's climate plans. I think the closest thing to that is his commitment to preserve 30% of America's land and water resources, essentially to preserve them. And I think to the extent that those lands and resources include forests, those are carbon sinks. One thing he does not also address, but could be addressed by certain areas of the plan, is that there are certain carbon capture and sequestration, CCS, technologies that are really interesting and might actually have a lot of really cool applications. And just from my own work, working at PG&E, we've looked at things like trying to capture carbon from, methane from power plants. And sometimes you can do it in such a form that it creates these kind of unusually productive fertilizers that are all natural. And, there are some really cool stuff like that I think might be addressed by the Advanced Research Projects Agency on Climate that Joe Biden has proposed, as well as additional investments in new technologies and in the private sector regarding clean energy. And I know we didn't really have time to go over this, but Joe Biden's plan says that he'd like to make a $2 trillion accelerated investment in infrastructure, focusing on clean energy. And that includes all of these things: union jobs, local and diverse workers, and modern infrastructure. But it also involves things like, the power sector and agriculture and conservation, which you can kind of see here on the page. And so I just didn't have time to go through all of them, but there definitely is a focus on agriculture and conservation as well. And there is a focus on conserving biodiversity specifically laid out. It's just not for sequestration. So no specific sequestration.
Okay. Kiss the ground.
Kiss the ground. All right. I'm going to run through in about 20 seconds Trump's, I would say plans, but they are not listed as plans on his website. He does not actually have a section for policies. He only has sections for achievements. And, he really boasts about expansion of onshore and offshore oil and gas drilling, financing, including, opening up the National Wildlife Refuge in the Arctic, and the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Keystone XL Pipeline. Some of the specific Obama-era regulations that they say they're most proud of rolling back is the Clean Power Plan, methane emissions rules, and fuel standards. It hurts my heart. That's all I'm going to say. They also withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement, which they felt was unfair, even though the United States actually was the one to start it. And they streamlined a Superfund task force, which is a group established in 1980 to handle emergency and hazardous waste sites. The only other
What are LNG terminals? What does that mean?
Good question. So LNG terminals are actually short for liquefied natural gas export. So they're building them, in the Gulf of Mexico and a few other places so that it's easier. Oil, it's easy to hold, but with natural gas, you have to compress it. You have to clean it and compress it until it is liquefied, in order to be able to contain it in a small amount of space and export it to other countries, which is what makes natural gas more difficult to export than oil. And so that whole process requires a lot of energy to reduce all of that gas into such a tiny space that it becomes liquid. And it requires specialized equipment. So you have to build special terminals that cost quite a lot of money to create. They were going to build them on the West Coast, because the largest markets for liquefied natural gas is Japan and Korea, and to an extent China. But because California and Oregon and Washington are all blue states, blue governors, and blue legislatures, they have essentially seen a blue wall and can no longer export coal or natural gas out of the West Coast, whatever that means to you. So the only other proposal that I saw that was related to energy or the environment was an investment in rural infrastructure. This particular proposal doesn't have a lot of detail. I think by comparison to Biden's plan, this is a one-page plan. And it does focus exclusively on rural communities, supporting kind of small business growth and employment, simply by essentially allocating $50 billion to the states to deploy in whatever way they like, using the governor's office. And they recommend that it be used in transportation, broadband deployment, water projects, and power and electric projects, but that is the full level of detail.
So I think we're sort of running short on time. Can you wrap up pretty soon?
Yes, I am in fact done. When I send this out to you, these are all of the sources that I used, and you can click on any of these and it will take you to the plans. Or down here, if you see New York Times articles and things like that, it'll take you to good overviews. If you want to learn more about any kind of topics I referenced but didn't really get into in a lot of detail, you can come here. And then that's me. So we're all done. Okay. Anyone have any other questions?
Thank you so much, Liz. That was really quite an accomplishment.
I'm sorry it took so long, but I really appreciate the questions.
It was perfect. Okay, Jeanette.
The COVID pandemic, Black Lives Matter. It feels like the world's been turned upside down.
And of course, there's the climate crisis, threatening the support systems of life on Earth. We don't have much time left to put the brakes on that one.
But we're beginning to see all these problems through a new lens, and to understand that the three crises of pandemic, racial injustice, and climate are connected.
The Green New Deal is showing us a path forward.
It says that the only real way to tackle the climate crisis is to transform the very foundations of our economy.
So we'd like to tell you about the Green New Deal, a remarkably ambitious and visionary proposal.
At the end, there are some things that you can do right now to spread the word and light a fire under our government.
We are Grandmothers for a Green New Deal, a group of elder women who care fiercely about our grandchildren and the world we are leaving them.
All of us are being hit by the climate crisis. But people of color, like some of my family, are most vulnerable. So I worry in particular about the future of young people, like my granddaughter.
I'm not a grandmother in the biological sense, but like all of us, I see my job as protecting the world's children, including my students, of course.
My granddaughter gets what's going on. At age 12, she calls the climate crisis an apocalypse. And as a Korean American, she understands that our country's racial inequalities are central to climate justice.
My grandbaby is still a bit young to carry her own protest sign, but we're working on it.
What's amazing is that young people around the world, like Greta Thunberg, are actually leading the climate movement today. Here are some of the others.
Varshini Prakash helped write Biden's climate policy.
The Green New Deal fundamentally is a solution that meets the scope and scale and urgency of the climate crisis without leaving any person behind. That's all it is.
A new generation is taking over at 350.org, one of the biggest climate groups worldwide.
We are fighting for environmental justice, which in plain English is jobs, infrastructure, and human health.
Some of these young people, like Hannah Estrada, are still in high school.
We really need you guys to understand how important this is, because depending on what you do right now, that's how future generations are going to remember you, as the generation who either did something and backed us up, or as the generation who left us in the dust.
One path forward is the Green New Deal.
The vision behind the Green New Deal is as big as the crisis it's addressing. For starters, it calls for a full transition to renewable energy by 2030.
But it also demands health, education, and housing for everyone, environmental protection, full employment or a guaranteed income, justice and equality for all.
And that everyone has a say in how all that happens.
Just to be clear, the Green New Deal is not legislation, but a resolution that could be the basis for a lot of legislation if we can get our leaders behind it.
It's being championed in the House by AOC, that's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and by Ed Markey in the Senate. And so far, it has substantial backing in the House and growing numbers in the Senate.
Right now, what the Green New Deal needs is a groundswell of support to build these numbers.
As a grandmother, mindful of the human family, I need to be part of this effort.
Let's look at the science behind climate change to understand why this is so very important right now.
The Industrial Revolution kick-started the modern era. It was fueled, literally, by cheap, plentiful energy from burning coal, and then oil, and then natural gas, all of which are composed largely of carbon. Burning all this fossil fuel sent tremendous amounts of carbon dioxide, CO2, and other gases into the atmosphere. These gases form a shield in the atmosphere which traps heat from being released, so the air around the planet heats up like a greenhouse.
By 2018, we'd heated up the planet by an additional 1 degree Celsius. That's about 2 degrees Fahrenheit.
But the world keeps pumping more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and the temperature keeps rising. 1 degree doesn't sound like much, but it's already causing havoc around the world.
That's because all this warming air and water is melting the ice caps, changing the jet stream, causing sea level rise, and a lot more. These changes to the planet's systems are themselves creating big impacts, like megafire, drought, floods, and hurricanes, and these weather impacts are affecting our health and livelihood.
In short, global warming is creating a global emergency.
Sometimes it just feels overwhelming. My response is to find the strength, compassion, wisdom, and hopefully humor to push for solutions, like the Green New Deal. So now let's zero in. What exactly does the Green New Deal say?
Well, the goal is net zero by 2030. That means that there is as much carbon being absorbed by the trees, soil, and other carbon sinks as the amount of carbon that is being released into the atmosphere.
How will we do this?
Well, we have to stop burning fossil fuels and get solar, wind, and other renewable power online quickly, a lot of it, and ramp up our research and development for other clean, zero-emission solutions. We also need to create a smart power grid that's energy efficient and decentralized to deliver this power.
All of this is in the Green New Deal resolution.
And the Green New Deal says we'll need big changes in our transportation system too, including affordable electric public transportation, swapping out our gas guzzlers for electric cars, and charging stations in all neighborhoods to make all this run.
The resolution says we'll also need changes in construction, like making our buildings energy and water efficient.
All these steps will lessen the damage brought on by climate change. But we also have to protect people and cities from climate impacts that it is too late to stop.
The Green New Deal calls for resilient cities, especially in low-income communities, so that cities can adapt to extreme weather events brought on by the climate crisis.
But solar panels and windmills are only one part of the puzzle, and here's why. Along with the climate crisis, we're also facing a lot of other critical issues, including income inequality, healthcare, education, housing, and jobs. When I got involved in the climate movement, I started to understand that all these social problems are actually part of the climate emergency. So, the Green New Deal argues that in order to tackle the climate crisis, we have to deal with all these interrelated issues.
When I think about the effects that climate change will have, I guess the impact on our health is the first thing that comes to mind. And as we've all learned, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed critical weaknesses and inequality in our healthcare system. So, the Green New Deal includes universal healthcare for everyone in the U.S. High-quality healthcare is a right, not a privilege.
Then there are jobs. Farming, fishing, and forestry are most at risk due to the climate crisis.
This is really big. Climate change threatens 1.2 billion jobs worldwide. What will that mean for my children, my grandchildren, this whole generation?
But the transition to a clean energy system can create a bounty of new jobs. So jobs are another big focus of the Green New Deal. It calls for millions of high-wage jobs with good benefits, including paid family and medical leave, paid vacations, and a secure retirement. It also demands workplace health and safety. It says that workers must have the right to unionize.
And it calls for a just transition. That means that as we move away from a fossil fuel-based economy, a lot of workers are going to lose their jobs in those industries. We have to ensure that they get the retraining and new jobs they will need so they don't get left behind.
How about education? Underfunded schools are not educating our children well. So how can they learn the science and critical thinking skills they'll need to tackle the tough climate challenges ahead? The Green New Deal sees a good education, including higher education, as part of the climate solution.
Then there's infrastructure and housing. Like most of America's major cities, the airport, sewage treatment system, and bridge ramps where I live are all built along the water, and they are all threatened by sea level rise. The Green New Deal? It requires affordable and safe housing for everyone in the U.S.
Agriculture. Floods are washing away fertile soil, while droughts are reducing crop yields.
So farming is part of the Green New Deal too. Supporting family farms to create a sustainable system so that everyone has healthy, affordable food.
Biodiversity is being ravaged by climate change around the world. For instance, warming seas and sea level rise have caused the loss of half the world's coral reefs in the last 30 years.
Half the world's reefs in 30 years. I was astonished by that figure.
And 500 million people depend on coral reefs for food, income, and coastal protection.
So environmental protection also factors into the Green New Deal. It says that everyone has a right to clean air, water, and access to nature. And we have to restore and protect threatened and fragile ecosystems.
What I've come to understand is that a lot of these problems are based on income inequality, which is actually higher today than any time since the Great Depression.
And it is the frontline communities, including indigenous peoples,
communities of color,
migrant communities,
women,
the elderly,
the unhoused,
people with disabilities,
and youth, who often bear the brunt of the climate catastrophe.
For one thing, toxic refineries and other industrial sites are usually located in Black and brown communities. And rates of asthma, cancer, and heart disease in these neighborhoods are often sky high. And these underlying health issues make COVID-19 more lethal. This is environmental racism.
Meanwhile, corporations and billionaires are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to influence legislation and to support politicians who will vote for their interests,
including their interest in fossil fuel extraction.
So the Green New Deal puts a big emphasis on justice and equality for all people living in the U.S., especially these vulnerable communities.
And in particular, for indigenous peoples, it demands informed consent for all decisions that affect their traditional territories.
The developed countries like ours, our governments and industry that created and benefit from this problem, bear a great responsibility.
But everyone has a right to be part of the solution.
I'm glad that the Green New Deal says we must listen to frontline communities. That will create better solutions. And bringing everyone to the table gives everyone a stake in the outcome.
One more thing. The Green New Deal says that the U.S. must become an international leader on climate action. In the process, our economy will grow strong as we innovate and produce the solutions for a new generation.
Yeah, there's a lot to do if we're going to make the Green New Deal a reality. But what can we do?
I find the 3.5% rule an inspiration. Harvard researcher Erica Chenoweth says it only takes 3.5% of the population actively participating in nonviolent protest to ensure serious political change.
The pandemic is creating a challenge for activists, but there's a lot you can do from home right now.
Here is how you can get involved.
For one thing, spread the word about the Green New Deal by telling everyone about this web story. You know what to do. Write your whole email list to friends and family. Ask other groups and organizations to send it out to their list. Post on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, every social media platform you have.
And get your climate message out with a banner drop, or signs in your windows, or posters in the neighborhood.
Get government leaders to take action on the climate and get climate champions elected.
Tell the banks that are funding oil pipelines what you think of them with a Yelp review, or get your friends together and write 50 reviews.
And join a climate group. Community is power. If you are an elder, check out Elders Climate Action or the 1,000 Grandmothers for Future Generations. If you're a bit younger than us, Sunrise is the youth group leading the Green New Deal charge. There's 350.org and Extinction Rebellion and Idle No More and Climate Justice Alliance. The movement is growing.
When it's safe, we'll be marching again. We hope to see you there.
As elders, we hear our children and grandchildren. We join them as allies in this struggle for their future. It is our legacy to them.
Thank you. Good to see it. I did see it before. It's good to see it again.
Yeah.
Who's not muted? Let's see. Somebody's making noises. Okay, well, we'll carry on here. Questions for Sally or her group here? Everybody's quiet. Did you learn anything? Was there anything there that you didn't already know, or any questions you'd ask about how they presented it?
It just made me glad to be a grandmother and feel that I have some power. And I think we all used to. It was an excellent production. Thank you very much. And very encouraging, because it makes us feel we can do something.
Join us.
Yeah. Well, let me jump in on that phrase. You can do something. And the reason we put this together is that we really feel that we expect Biden to get in. We hope for a Senate majority, Democratic Senate and House. That's just the beginning of our work. At that point, the American people, our leaders are not going to act without being pushed. And the American people have to know what this is so that they can really do all the things that we talked about at the end and so many more to make sure that our leaders do something. And so I think our job, all of our job now, is to teach the rest of America what the Green New Deal is, what this resolution's about, what legislation could come out of it. And so I'd like to, put it in your laps to figure out how to get it out to all the people that you know, all your lists, all your organizations. If you've got a really good influencer, somebody who really has a lot of people they could send it to, or an organization that is big and powerful that you have some sway with, we'd love to hear from you. grandmothersforagreennewdeal.org, just write us. And there's a contact sheet there, and you can write us and say, I've got an idea for you.
Right. It's very easy, actually, to send the link. We've been doing that to our friends and family and groups that we belong to and people we hardly know. and we've actually been getting very good feedback. It's been it's been very encouraging to see that people are taking this to heart and moving themselves to do what they can do, because we can all do things. We all have power.
I'll just say that the premise is that the youth are leading the charge and we're supporting them. And I think the positive message of older people jumping into this fight in support is powerful for young people. And so, you know, we really urge other elders to send it around as a representation of that support.
Yeah, Carol, I just wanted to echo that, what all of my compatriots said, but my daughter said, Mom, it's a little slow, but I learned a lot. And my daughter's 49. And I took that as an endorsement because she's quite tough and her husband's a writer. So I think it is very G-rated, very simple, but I think it's accessible to all communities.
Right.
And I hope people will share it.
Yeah.
Liz, did you have something to say?
Oh, I was going to say, all right, I'm unmuted. I was going to say, I appreciate it. I'm 33, so not the youngest of the young, but, you know, as someone who has decided to dedicate my life to this work, I appreciate seeing, you know, folks like you guys who are making the effort on our behalf. I think so often, you know, we feel, speaking for a whole generation, I think a lot of times we feel like, I mean, I'm a millennial and I graduated during the Great Recession, and, you know, wasn't too long afterwards we had, well, during that time we had the Iraq War, and, you know, this is the second recession that has hit me in one decade, which covers my entire professional life. I mean, it does occasionally feel like there are some people who have power by virtue of their age or their position in society who are not looking out for us. And so having something like this, and I think every individual feels like they don't have enough power to do anything or to change anything, but at least from our perspective, we look at you and say, you know, politicians listen to you guys, you know, they listen to you. They think of, you know, certain voting blocks and things as people who reliably come out to vote. And so, you know, if you guys stand up for something, then they're more likely to listen to you than to us. So even doing little things, anything on our behalf really makes a big difference and makes us feel like we're a part of a larger community that's making this effort together. So thank you for doing that.
Dennis, I think Eric is going to ask first, and then you second. Okay?
Yeah. Maybe a comment here that all of us here, or not all of us exactly, but almost all of us are white. You know, we're not people of color. But in the pictures you showed in the quite entertaining, very accurate actually, show we just saw, the people there are almost all of color, and the problem is that a lot of less wealthy or poor white people, they vote for Trump because they think the colored people are going to take over the country, and it just feeds into that. It would have been nice if there'd been sort of more white people in hard hats and that kind of thing in the movie. So that's just a comment that we have to spread out a little bit more and get a wider, bigger part of the population interested in this. Anyway, that's I thought the whole thing was good. I don't object to anything, but it's but I think that would help presenting the whole thing to people who might not be so enamored of the Green New Deal. So thank you.
So just to respond, if you count the pictures, it's about half white people and half people of color.
We were
very
careful
often
to try to balance things. But
right. But I think it is important for us people who are white and privileged and maybe even, have some resources monetarily and otherwise and power to make common cause with people who don't. And it is true that the head of North America's 350.org now is a woman of color, an African-American woman. The head of Sunrise is an Indian, South Asian Indian woman who helped, as we said, write Biden's proposal. So they are stepping up and are part of this movement more and more so. And we need to find ways to make those connections.
Yeah.
We actually got criticized last round, the earlier round, because we didn't have enough people of color in it. We put a lot back in.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
But I think your point is well taken. I really do.
Yes.
I the undereducated, the Trump voters, basically, the undereducated, unrepresented white people have a lot of resentments, and we need to be careful to take that seriously.
Right.
As in terms of political understanding, it's true. Yeah.
I have a comment.
Is it my turn? I'll take a turn. Okay, so moving along, you guys were facing Halloween and Thanksgiving. So how can we launch this movie with our families and or with our trick-or-treaters or whatever? And it's a little hard because we're not necessarily getting together at Thanksgiving, or maybe we are. I don't know, but it seems like it's a good time to do, Thanksgiving is a good time to do intergenerational outreach.
Good idea. Yeah.
And let our family members at least have a link to the movie, or what do we call it?
We call it a web story because it is a story to the web in photos and sound.
Right, with a web story. And so it's positive and it's what you can do, and it links you up with all the different programs, and you have a lot of choice. Good. We still need to look at Kiss the Ground though too.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a really good idea.
Yeah, I love your idea of getting to our families during the holidays. And because it is a piece for the web, it's an online piece, it's actually working well for us in this time where we're all shut into our own cubicles and talking to each other over the internet. So yeah, show it to your family at your Zoom Thanksgiving.
I have a couple comments, folks. One is that we have passed 9 o'clock. We can keep on talking for a while, but our meeting is set from 7:30 to 9. So anyone that has to leave, please feel free. And anybody that would like to continue the conversation, we can go on for a little bit longer. Also, I want people to know this is a copy of the Bay Area Monitor. It is a publication from the League of Women Voters of the Bay Area. And they have contacted us, and they are going to write a story for the Monitor based on the whole presentation tonight, on all of what we're talking about, I think. And then I have a rather silly question, but I have thought of it a bit because I am in the grandmothers group and a lot older than some of the other people here. And so when I hear the Great Depression, I think of the Great Depression that my parents went through prior to my being born. And yet Liz was referring to the Great Depression, which happened in the 2000s. You used the word in the Great Depression in your web story. Which one were you referring to?
Oh, the depression, not the recession.
The
actual depression.
Or the Great Recession. I don't know what you called it.
If I said depression, I think I may have misspoke. I did mean to refer to the Great Recession. They do sound so similar, right? So.
Maybe that's what you said and I heard it wrong.
And I think it's important when you're speaking with older people or our age people to reference the Green New Deal. The roots of the Green New Deal are in the New Deal. You know,
Right.
I mean, it was FDR's amazing, bold, radical, desperate, completely disorganized, throw it on the wall and see what happens. You know, that's what the New Deal was. And a lot of it worked and a lot of it didn't. But it was, you know, it had to be.
I think Biden is also referencing that in talking a lot about the unions and the jobs and doing what we need to do now to fix the situation.
It's really important to link those things together.
Right, exactly. And Liz, I wanted to ask you, as we talk about what can we do, you're in the, I guess it's the sustainability department of PG&E. Is that what your title is? Or forgot what it is exactly, but you've got an audience there. And I know a lot of them are on a different page, but I wonder if there is I'd love to talk to you about whether there is a way to use PG&E as a vehicle to get more people to know about this, to see this piece.
Yeah, so I am, it's kind of ironic because we do have a sustainability group, but a lot of the company is about sustainability. So I actually work in our customer group. I work on customer programs focusing on solar. And there are other programs that focus on electric vehicles and some that focus on battery storage or microgrids or all these really cool things that are making it possible for different types of people to begin to access new forms of renewable energy and for us to start proving to the rest of the world and to the rest of the country that solar, distributed solar, so solar on rooftops, that renewable energy, that electric vehicle charging systems can work. And we're proving and figuring out how they can work and then sharing that information with everybody. And I think you will not find a lot of people who are, well, actually, that's not entirely true. There's a significant segment of employees at PG&E who work in the Central Valley and who grew up and who live there and who may have a very different opinion on the presidential election than I do or that we do. But I think all in all, there's nobody in PG&E or almost anywhere in California that thinks that climate change isn't man-made or that we don't have to do something about it. And
so we got a step ahead there already.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people who do feel a lot of pride, and I think you all can feel a lot of pride if you purchase your energy from PG&E that your energy is 80% greenhouse gas free right now. And
so you may have, I don't know, but you may have an audience there, either in your customers or in your staff, your personnel.
It would be unprofessional of me to distribute anything political to any of my customers, but I could always send your video to some of my friends at PG&E, and I would be happy to do that, but obviously not in a professional capacity.
No, I understand
take
that.
your customer privacy and their choices very seriously. Yeah, just send me the video, and I will send it to my friends.
Great.
I wonder if everyone here has seen the executive order that Gavin Newsom passed a few days ago about biodiversity in California. Yes. If you haven't, look it up because it's sort of a Green New Deal for California.
Great. Carol, you're muted. Carol, you're muted.
Thank you, Sally. We're hoping to have that be our next program next month. So thank you for bringing that up.
Great segue.
And if there are no burning questions from other people, we will call this meeting to and thank everybody so much. We jam-packed many, many things into this period of time, and we hope we got the brainwaves sparkling in there.
Go out and vote.
Amy, Carol. Yeah.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much.